Yeah, welcome back to ME 7365 Manufacturing Strategy. Now, in this particular segment, we're going to be discussing the frameworks for manufacturing strategy. The reason we have to do that is if you took this course at the Harvard Business School, one of the prerequisites would be competitive strategy, which means the overall compilation of a corporate and a business strategy. And it's only then that you can truly understand where you need to go with your manufacturing strategy. So what we're going to do here is talk about some of those concepts, and we'll embed them in much greater detail as we move through the course. So let's move forward here. Now in strategy, now this is from Arnaldo Hawks of MIT. He's the professor pretty much in charge of most of the strategy programs within the MIT Sloan School. And this is how he defines strategy, which I like. Is coherent, unifying, and integrative pattern of decisions. In other words, everybody in the company needs to be going in the same direction and achieving the same things as closely as possible, going toward the same ends overall. determines and reveals the organization in terms of long-term objectives, action programs, and resource allocation priorities. These are the action programs that you put in place in order to implement strategy. Figure out what business that you're in so that you're able to, more generally focus your organization, not go running off in different directions and things that you probably shouldn't be doing. Attempting to achieve long-term sustainable advantage in each of the businesses by looking at what opportunities and threats to your environment. These are things that are outside of your control, but you constantly have to monitor. And then the strengths and weaknesses, these are things inside your corporation or entity that you can control, and you need to be able to do a realistic assessment of exactly what those are. And then we get down into the hierarchical levels, corporate strategy, business strategy, and then the functional strategy. We're going to talk about those in more detail. And then of course, figure out, what economic and non-economic contributions you intend to make to your stakeholders. So there are tangible economic activity, but then there's also non-economic contributions like, contributing to the society, having pride in what you're doing, and non-economic contributions, okay? So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna switch to a blue pad here. And what we're gonna do with the blue pad is take a strong look at deriving a strategic planning process. There we go. So there's my famous blue pad. When we're defining strategy, the first thing we want to do, at least from my perspective, is to come up with a vision. This is where we intend to be somewhere out in the future, and what your vision entails is looking out in what we call the strategic planning horizon. In other words, how far can you realistically look forward within your entity, within your company, within your purpose, to figure out, where can we stick a stake in the ground where everybody can agree this is where we want to be in a certain amount of time. What do I mean by this? For most companies, 3 to 5 years is about as far out as you can really look in terms of being able to make assumptions that will probably come true, and having a vision that is attainable through direct action. In an aerospace company, that could be up to 10 years because of the length of some of the programs that are in aerospace and defense. In a .com company, that could be 6 months to a year. So your vision is incumbent upon this strategic planning horizon. And so you have to decide where it is that you want to be in that time. Now, after that, we need to start getting down a little bit more programmatic. And now we're going to come up with what we're going to call the mission. Now, the mission in this particular model, which is from Dr. Hawks, is a lot different than the missions you probably read in annual reports or see in Dilbert cartoons. In this particular case, we're thinking about 4 specific areas: products, markets, geographies, and competencies. So products, what specific products or services am I going to bring to the market? And then the market, what exactly is the market? How do you define that? What are the demographics of that market? Who is the actual buyer, and how well do we match up the products in the market? So you end up coming up with what we call a product market matrix. So we have certain products for certain markets. For instance, when you're designing a sports car, you usually have an individual in mind, the person who's going to be driving that sports car. If you're designing a minivan, have a certain kind of person, market that you're designing that minivan for. Same thing with a pickup truck. These are three separate distinct markets for which you're designing products, and the products are going to be different for each of those markets. After that, you're thinking about geography. So geography, if you're going to design a car for the United States, a sports car for the United States, it's one kind of car. If you're going to design it for Europe, it's going to be a different kind of car. The steering wheel is going to be on the opposite side. Some of the issues with pollution and things are slightly different, and some of the electronics are going to be slightly different. So we have to think about the geographical considerations, and then competencies are, what specific competencies do I have to develop in order to be able to move forward in being able to achieve my mission. My mission is what? Achieve my vision out, whatever my strategic planning horizon is, 3 to 5 years. After that, we're taking a look at what I call the internal scrutiny. And also balancing that against my environmental scan. So internal scrutiny, this is, what do I do well? What do I do poorly? What can I do better? These are all the things, like I said, with inside the company over which I have control, and that I need to be able to take and do a realistic assessment of. So here initially you come out with a series of strengths and weaknesses. On the other end of that equation, you've got the environmental scan. These are the things outside of the control of the corporation. Okay, and so there's models that we use. We'll be talking about Michael Porter's 5 forces model in just a second, but there's ways that we try and scan what's going on outside of your control. Customers, outside of your control, but you have to constantly keep track of them. Competitors, constantly outside of your control, but you have to keep track of them. Suppliers, yeah, you can control them a little bit, but for the most part, you can't totally control them. So you have to keep track of where they are and where they're going, right? So this gives you an idea of your opportunities and your threats. Now, once you do all this, now, for the first time, we can start thinking about strategy. And in this case, strategy are those things that I'm going to do differently, for the most part, moving forward. Why am I doing things differently? Well, I have to take a look at, I have products, markets, geographies, and competencies. And here I've got now and future. Okay, what products I have now, what products am I going to have in the future? Markets now and future, geographies now and future, competencies now and future. Okay, a lot of change here. Delta, mathematical symbol for change, right? So I've got a lot of changes going on here, and I need to be able to prioritize that and figure out how I'm going to put resources to it. At the same time, I did my internal scrutiny. I have my strengths that I need to continue to play on, and then I've got my weaknesses that I need to shore up. Okay, more change. Opportunities and threats, I need to be able to anticipate. What is out there, and I need to be constantly monitoring my environment to be able, my competitive environment, to be able to figure out, okay, what's going to come along that I need to be ready for, both opportunity-wise and threat-wise. More change. So you're going to look at all these changes going on. You can continually monitor all these changes, and then once you do that, you start to figure out, you have to prioritize how are you going to use your limited resources to be able to cope with all these changes. Now, how do you do changes within a corporation? Well, we have two things. We have processes in a corporation. Those things tend to be relatively stable. The business processes within a corporation. Projects, however, projects are defined by having a beginning and an end. They use up resources, and they come up with a specific deliverable, a specific change, a specific impact upon the corporation. Okay, so now I've got my list of projects over here, and we have to figure out, how do we prioritize what products, what markets, what geographies, what competencies, making sure we keep our strengths, making sure we shore up our weaknesses. What opportunities are out there? Can we take advantage of those things? What threats are coming along and that we have to react to or prepare to react to? And then you need to categorize your projects in terms of importance and which ones you really need to do. Okay, and this is basically strategy, doing your strategic programming. Once you do that, come up with a budget. Why? Because a strategy without a budget is really just a wish list. And then you need to do something called management control. What is management control? Well, essentially, we made assumptions up here as to what products were going to be successful and which ones weren't. We made assumptions about markets. We made assumptions about geographies and competencies. We made assumptions about opportunities and threats and strengths and weaknesses. We have to go back every so often and take a look at, were those assumptions correct, and are these projects that we have, are they effective? Are they getting the results that we wanted? And that's what management control is going back every once in a while and doing that. Okay, so for instance, if my vision here was, my strategic planning horizon was 3 to 5 years, I probably want to go back and look and do management control and do a project review of all my projects, maybe every quarter, and as a minimum annually, to be able to figure out, okay, yes, I'm getting the results that I needed for my projects. I am in fact doing the right projects. I am getting the most bang for my limited resources buck, and then I'm able to move the corporation forward in the direction that I want it to go. So overall, this is your business strategy. Okay, this is how you put together a strategic plan to be able to move your corporation forward in sort of what we call kind of a closed loop system. It has to be closed loop because you've got limited resources within the company. At the same time, you have to respond through all those things that are outside the company. So there's a lot of variables going on here that we need to continually deal with. Okay, so that's the derivation of our strategic plan and how that works. We're going to go back to SMU here. Okay, there I am. I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller here. So we talked about the strategies here. And the reason that we do all this is, we want to meet what we call the innovation gap. Everybody wants to be, growing, getting the company bigger, better. When the company grows, there's more opportunities, there's more profitability. But if you don't do anything, if you don't change, you just keep doing the things, coming out with the same old products to the same old markets all the time, odds are, with the rest of the world changing, with your competitors attacking you, with your customers constantly changing their mind and wanting new and different things, if you don't change, you're going to be on this downward slope in what we call the unchanging model. The difference between where you want to be and what you may be on is that's that innovation gap, and that's the gap that we're going to try and fill with some of these strategies that we're going to put in place. And here's the way it works. Here's your typical corporation. At the top, the corporate decides what they're going to be in, what businesses they're going to be in. We used the example before. We've got sports cars, we've got minivans, we've got pickup trucks. Those things are all separate businesses. If you'll notice within, when you see an advertisement for a car on TV, they don't say buy General Motors or buy Ford. They usually say, they show a person driving the car that they're trying to sell, and that person, being very happy and looking great in that environment. And that's to focus on what? The market to which they're trying to sell that particular product. That's a strategic business unit. And most strategic business units, and we'll take an automobile example. They've got their marketing department doing their own advertising. They've got their own manufacturing and their own technology development and engineering. Why? Because they're designing and manufacturing a pickup truck is dramatically different than a minivan or a sports car. Now, there are some components those things can share, air conditioning and some other things, okay? But but overall, so the drivetrains and other things on those things could be very different. So you've got different manufacturing, different technology, different procurement. You're hiring different kinds of engineers potentially, and each one has their own profit and loss statements. The different cars have different profitability levels and different financials, so they're different. And then usually the strategic business unit president is the one who has profit loss responsibility for that particular line. Okay, so that's a strategic business unit. Now these strategic business units within a corporation compete against each other a little bit, but yet the corporation has to decide where exactly is it that we want to put our critical resources. We want to put it more into, SUVs. SUVs are maybe selling or not selling right now. Do we want to emphasize or de-emphasize that? It just depends on where they want to go. Some corporations are totally going in different directions. I worked with a company one time where she was a Borough Ponds Beauty Queen, but at the same time they owned Prince tennis rackets and a semiconductor company. They had very different strategic business units because that's just the way their corporate strategy was. They were, driving, a lot more different businesses, so they wouldn't be all in the same business. For in a car company, usually if people aren't buying cars, they're not buying cars. But if you spread them out, so that's just the way some people develop their corporate strategies. Okay, so that's the corporate strategy, and they're answering these questions. Okay, what is the overall enterprise going to do? What do they want to do? How do you leverage stakeholders? How do you relate to businesses? How do you manage change? Where do you invest? Where do you add value? And what's the synergy between these different strategic business units? And that's what a corporate strategy model looks like. That's similar to the one I drew on the blue pad. But here they're looking more at, when they get to the corporate strategy, they're looking more at strategic thrusts, planning changes, and corporate objectives. And what you'll find is at the corporate strategy level, you have to kind of minimize the number of really true, strong strategic thrusts that you have. Otherwise, you confuse everybody in the corporation. If you're trying to do 30 at one time, people have no idea of what's important, what's not important. If you do 3 or 5 to 5, people have a better idea of what's most important. Business strategy. So here, this is more in line with what we drew on the blue pad. Products, customers, geographies, competencies, linkages. In other words, how are we going to link vertically within the corporation? For example, Apple tends to do most of their designs and their critical core competencies. Those are in the Apple headquarters there in Cupertino. However, a lot of their manufacturing is done by another company in China. It's very well supervised, but they decide not to own their own manufacturing capabilities. That's a decision they made in terms of vertical linkages. They also have, in terms of the designs for a lot of their things, they bring in an industrial design firm, IDEO and others, to be able to make them very, very appealing to buyers. So that's just how they vertically link with other corporations. Okay, how do they leverage stakeholders? How do they line their businesses? Where do they invest? And how do you find opportunities? And there's the business strategy model. That's a nicer version of what I drew on the blue pad. Now I should tell you that some people, Dr. Hawks feels that the vision, you shouldn't start with the vision. You should just dive right into the mission and start diving down into the details. I disagree. I think you should think about your strategic planning horizon, your vision first, but it's just a matter of, where are you going to start? But overall, though, the process needs to be tight together and needs to be continual and moving all the time. So I'm going to give you an example of a vision here that was very, very effective.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. We shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
So I think once you hear that vision, I think it's relatively easy at that point to start populating parts of the strategy model. You heard a lot of the interesting challenges that the president was giving to the country at the time. Now, I should tell you that what was interesting, that was put together kind of at the last minute, and the guys who were down at it has become NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, have since, they did not know that was coming. And as a result, they were getting flooded with phone calls. And so they had to really sit down and do what? Build a strategy, figure out what specific products, how are we going to build these things, how we're going and they had a very good idea from the president's vision as to how to start to populate that process for moving forward. And as we all know, they did in fact hit the vision, of that the president had outlined. So that's why I like to start with the vision. I think it clarifies a lot of the decisions that you have later on in the process. So, and here's like a more detailed mission statement out of, right out of MIT Sloan. So here, this is actually for a commodity metals, a natural resource-based firm. So here, that you look at product initially, commodity metals and fossil energy projects, but they're going to try and get into non-commodity stuff in the future. Markets, initially, metals, automotive, steel industries, in energy, but they're going to expand into non-durable consumer and expand into the service industry. Currently, Europe, Australia, North America, they're going to start focusing on Latin America and East Africa. How are they going to do this? What competencies do they have to develop? Have dedicated exploration of quality mines, have a significant marketing presence now and in the future, intensify low-cost production, a lot of marketing and R&D to develop new products, and then manage economic and financial risk. So these are the things, competencies that they're going to have to develop. And so once you do that, then you have to take a look at, okay, you have the changes here, you've identified current and future, and what are the changes moving forward? Well, here I've got a high-tech example. In this case, changes in product scope. Okay, they're looking at Reducing overlapping of product lines, protect the low end of the product range from foreign competition, at the same time develop new products with proprietary technologies, broaden, develop alliance for data processing, and develop software and product. Now they develop this from their, their now and future migration plan. Same thing with market scope. Okay, go into consumer while maintaining presence in industrial, and then start to penetrate markets that become standard. In this case, identifying the dominant design and taking advantage of that, right? Okay, geographic scope, looking to go into Japan, looking to further solidify Europe, and then look at opportunities in Southeast Asia and China. Changes in technology, incorporate emerging technologies, couple responsibilities for design and manufacturing and products and data processing. That gives them, quicker to market designs and products, and then produce technology for software development. Changes in how they're going to compete. This is their competencies again, right? Rationalize their worldwide manufacturing strategies. So they're going to have to take a strong look at, do they have the right resources at the right place around the world? Start to develop alliances, start focusing on service, work with customers more in their technical solutions so they can get a better idea that they're bringing their solutions that their customers actually want and need. And then speeding up cycle time for design and manufacturing. A lot of that will be done with some of the things that we've discussed up here by, bringing design and manufacturing and building those capabilities together. We talked about a value chain here, and this was in the on our model on the left-hand side. You remember we did the internal scrutiny, and this is one of the techniques you used to do in internal scrutiny. So in a value chain, this is another Michael Porter model that he brought forward. And then, inbound logistics, just how are you going to get stuff inside the company? Okay, this raw material, parts, components, whatever, your actual operations, then how do you get it out of the company? How do you do marketing and sales, and how do you do service? Now, these are what we call value-added activities here. And how well you do all this usually is how well you do your margins. Now, we've got other activities up here, and initially we called these, Michael Porter first built his model, he called these non-value added activities, and the people in these functions got angry, so now we call them support activities. But enterprise infrastructure, how well do you, like a lot of you're familiar with things like SAP and a lot of computerization of being able to get information around a company quickly. How well do we hire and keep and train the right people? How well do we take advantage of technology and get it embedded into our products? And then how well do we, procure exactly what it is we need to continue moving the entire enterprise forward? So that's the value chain, and that's how well we do all these things is really what gives us our strengths and our weaknesses. And we have to take a very solid look at those. Now they have people, sometimes they call them reengineering experts or, efficiency experts, whatever, but they'll sit down and they'll build out giant flow diagrams of how well we do all these things and look and make sure that we haven't got redundant processes in place, and look and see where we haven't, been able to do things, the best possible way. I remember I did one once for an aerospace company, and, we found out that when they were, the VP of operations actually came to me and said, I know for a fact that I'm out there spending money right now to expedite parts for things where there's an engineering change notice out there have already made that part obsolete. And sure enough, he was right. So we had to go in and take a strong look at how well they got engineering change notices out of engineering through all the signatures they needed and down to the shop floor to stop just, building parts that were obsolete. Those just turned out to be scrap. There's things like that always going on, and you always have to be on the lookout for those when you do your internal scrutinies. There's kind of internal scrutiny for a retailer, a little bit easier to understand sometimes. You look at how well do you work with your vendors, how well do you do your sourcing, your procurement, how well do you get the right things on the floor that things that people want to buy, different categories, different spaces. How well do you manage the warehouses and inventory planning and demand forecasting to make sure you get those things on, when you're dealing with a variety of, let's say, clothing, a variety of, dresses, different colors, same styles, different sizes, getting that balance right can be pretty tough sometimes. So it takes a lot of planning and historical analysis. Then once you get in the store, how well do you actually make it so that people can find your merchandise and get the right ones, and then manage the right prices and make sure that shrinkage is another way to say make sure that things don't get broken and stolen. And then how well do you leverage that against your e-commerce capabilities? And then eventually, how well do you know your customers, which helps you do a lot of this merchandising and in-store solutions a lot better. So, and then there's the support activities, okay? So that's a retail look at this side. Michael Porter 5 Forces model here. Here's a little bit better look at that. So here we take a look at first rivalry among our existing competitors. So you're looking at, how many you have, how diverse are they, where's the industry content, are you growing, what's the quality difference, how do they compete against how you compete, and how well do you do that? And those are just analyzing, your competitors. New entrants, are there new entrants that are going to come out and blindside you? What are the barriers to entry, for example? Barriers to entry in the semiconductor fabrication facility are high. Why? Because the geometries are getting so small, it costs like $1 billion to build a semiconductor fabrication facility these days. On the other end, in Texas, we got to see Michael Dell start off Dell Computer in his garage, with a couple of his buddies snapping PCs together. And so the barriers to entry in that particular entrance were very low. So, it just depends on where you are and how easy it is to get into the business. And things like brand loyalty come into account, government policies, access to distribution channels. How tough is it for somebody to switch? A lot of people don't want to switch phones, for instance, because they have all their apps for their current phone and they know how to use them, and they'd have to switch everything out, right? So bargaining power buyers, these are your customers. How many do you have? If you've got one or two customers, they have a lot of bargaining power. For instance, if you do a lot of work specifically for the government, then the government, that's your customer, and so that limits you. But if you're selling more of a commodity-based consumer product, then you've got a lot of customers. Now that's a different challenge. And then people, how sensitive are people to price? And then once we get down to information availability and switching costs. Bargaining power suppliers, how many are out there? If there's only one supplier, the biggest one here is probably in the PC industry. You've got suppliers who supply things like disk drives and PC boards and stuff. They don't have a lot of power. Who has power? Microsoft and Intel, and they were the ones who actually capture a lot of the profitability inside that particular industry. Threat of substitute products. Now, substitute product is not a direct competitor, but is something that can substitute for what you bring them. For instance, if you're selling automobiles, what substitutes for automobiles? Well, you can walk, you can take the bus, you can get a motorcycle, you can ride a bike. Those are all substitutes for getting a person from one place to the other. All right. So, a substitute is something that they can, somebody else could use it for something else. For instance, these days, the more modern example would be for PCs. What's a substitute product for PCs a lot these days? iPads. Okay. People are, they don't need all that PC, desktop PC necessarily offers. They don't need all that power. If all they want to do is have something that, just send simple email and they can watch movies and things on, iPad's fine. If you're a gamer, you used to get a big souped up PC, and now you can buy a gaming Sony PlayStation or something. And that's a great substitute for a PC. And that's something that also chips away at the PC industry. So that's a substitute product. Some generic strategies here. This is something else Michael Porter put together. Michael Porter, by the way, is a professor at Harvard Business School, and he also has his own consulting firm. But he says you can be low cost or you can be unique. And if you haven't got a unique product, you're low cost. That's, if everybody's the same, then why would you buy something that's exactly the same and pay more for it? Well, you wouldn't. Most people would not. So, if everybody looks the same and everybody's offering the same thing, you're competing on price. And then the other end of it is, are you focused on everybody, or are you focused on a very narrow market subject now segment? In this case, let's say in the retail industry, for instance, who's low cost that's targeting everybody, and that'd be Walmart, right? Walmart, cost leadership. They bring you in by low cost, and they offer everything that they can. Now, for the longest time, Target tried to mimic the Walmart model, and they almost went bankrupt. And as a result, they said, okay, we're going to change the way we do things at Target. We're going to go a little bit higher end. We're going to, have wider aisles. We're going to have a little bit better customer service. We're going to do all these things different. And once they did that, and they had a slightly different, unique, approach, then all of a sudden they started getting profitable again, just because they made themselves slightly different than Walmart. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a huge difference. Sometimes it's a subtle difference. But in this case, Target, it was the one that was able to do that. Or if you want to be totally unique and go for a narrow market segment, so this is just a certain kind of a customer, okay, you're probably Neiman Marcus, right? So, Neiman Marcus, there's a certain kind of customer that walks into Neiman Marcus. They're not necessarily focused on cost. They're willing to pay for service and much higher end goods and a lot better service. Okay, so that's a focus strategy. You're totally differentiating yourself here. How about a focus strategy that's also low cost for a narrow market segment? Where there's a company here in Dallas called Tuesday Morning. Tuesday Morning is very interesting because you're not really quite sure what you're going to get when you walk into Tuesday Morning. But you know what? People usually walk in there and they end up buying something. Because they have stuff that's everybody uses, a lot of glassware, a lot of linens, towels and bed sheets and all kinds of knickknacks. But it's all at a great low cost. And because what they do is they go and they get things that other major corporations weren't selling, and they bring it in, they really mark it down, and then they sell it. And there's so many good deals in there. People just show up. Nobody knows what's going to be in there when they walk in, but they usually end up buying something. That's a very narrow market, and it's really focused on the low cost solution. So that's the way that you can look at the Porter's generic strategies here and where your company may fit in. Here's another framework that we look at a lot. And this is more of before we were looking at micro frameworks, where we're looking specifically at the enterprise and the immediate competitive environment. Here we're looking at the macro environment. So we're looking more at countries and different, the overall country, or different, looking at going into a different country, for instance. So we have to look at political, economics, sociological, and technological aspects, pest analysis, we call these. And here's one we're looking at electric vehicles. Political side, you have government incentives. You're looking at the, goal to raise the production capacity of hybrids, road space rationing, vehicle quota systems that, are hurting conventional autos, especially in California. Economic, well, sometimes you have to look at things like the inflation rate, labor costs, economic outlook, the city's economic outlook. If you're looking to move a factory somewhere, people are starting to migrate out of certain parts of the United States into other parts of the United States. The people are starting to migrate certain capabilities from one country to, say, China, which has a very, cheap labor force. So these are things that we have to look at from an economic standpoint. Social aspects, well, in the electric cars, young consumers are very open to that. The older consumer is not necessarily really embraced, Tesla and some of those things yet. That doesn't mean to say it's not going to happen soon. And also, how far do people travel on a daily basis? 35 kilometers on weekends, 75% of the citizens, that's all they have to go. So the current battery inside electric vehicles is fine. However, if you're going to start traveling across the United States with one of those, it's not quite so practical, although they're starting to put an infrastructure in there to be able to achieve that. So these are the sociological things that we think about. And then, of course, technological, battery range, we talked about lacking charging stations. These are things that are kind of hampering, the electric vehicle from a macro sense. So, we call these things complementary innovators. In the car industry, you've got different kinds of complementary innovators outside of your immediate grasp as an enterprise. If you're making automobiles, who are they? Well, who are the people that make travel a car easy? Roads. So in that particular case, the government is a complementary innovator. The other one would be gas stations. Without gas stations, you wouldn't be able to travel very far. So that's a complementary innovator to your particular enterprise. And so charging stations across the electrical charging stations with a battery that you can charge up relatively quickly would make electric cars a lot more popular. So that's a pest analysis. We dive down into the operational strategies, manufacturing strategies here, and you've got two types of strategies. Structural, these are things that you can look and touch and feel. The capacity of the factory, how well you're doing vertical integration, the facilities that you have, the size, the location, the specialization, where do you put final assembly versus where do you put components, versus, what kind of specialization do you have? Do you have an R&D center separate from the factory? Do you have it located to the factory? Do you have your final assembly located next to for your customers, for instance? When I was VP of engineering for a company that made printing presses, we made printing presses for high-end uses, government documents, Russian rubles, French francs, British pounds, US dollars, high-end printing, right? A lot of little tricks inside the high-end printing to make sure they couldn't be counterfeited. So, but we had a factory, because to get around some of the trade laws going into the European Union, we had a factory in France. So we did a lot of the major components here in the United States, and we did final assembly in France. And that gave a comfort level to the customers that we had overseas. And also we were close to them. They could come, they could see their presses being made. And there was a lot of interaction there and a lot of good relationship building. So that a lot of times these are the things you have to think about when you build facilities. And then of course, information and process technology, degree of automation, robotics, materials handling, how well do you leverage your information systems, those kinds of things. Now, infrastructural decisions, on the other hand, these are softer decisions, but they're equally important. Once you get the structural decisions right, infrastructural decisions become equally important. How well do you allocate your resources and figure out your capital budgeting, right? How well do you hire and train and keep people? How well do you, get people doing the right things? How well do you do quality? How well do you measure and reward people, right? What are your production and process systems? And then how well are you organized? Are you decentralized? Are you centralized? How do you delegate? What does the staff do? All these things, doing these things right, once you get the structure, the hard decisions, and by hard I mean, structural decisions. If the infrastructural decisions can have a very, very strong impact. And so we have to look at both of these very, very strong as we move forward in improving the company. Product lifecycle management, as a product comes out, usually initially, there's your product that comes out. You're not really sure what it's going to do. If it's a hit, all of a sudden you go through rapid growth. Now, rapid growth means everybody else is going to notice your competitors, which means they're going to start jumping in and you're going to have competitive turbulence. At some point, you hit, everybody who's going to buy one pretty much has bought one, and then you start to have sales decline. At some point, you need to, what I call jumping the curve here to the next level. When do you jump the curve? Well, what you need to start looking at, are you going to have what kind of an innovation you're going to have to be able to move to the next level? Is it going to be incremental? Is it going to be radical? So incremental innovations, such as, let's say let's talk about the iPod. We had an iPod come out. Now, initially, Steve Jobs brought the iPod together. What's interesting about the iPod is that initially, was it a brand new product? Well, no, not really. Was there digital music at the time? Well, yeah, every college kid with an Napster account knew there was digital music. Could you play the digital music? Well, of course you did. Most college kids played it on their PCs. Some went out and bought these little clunky devices, digital music players. weren't very nice looking. The Rio was probably the most popular at the time. And could you get them, get the electronic music onto the, digital music player? And the answer is, yeah, you had to know how to do file transfer protocols and things like that. Well, Steve Jobs came along and he made a iPod that looked cool. Theoretically, you walk around and you had a lot of social currency just walking around looking cool with your iPod because he designed it to look very sleek. And then he was able to combine all that with iTunes so that even grandma could get her music on her iPod. And then he did deals with the record companies. The trouble with Napster was is you had to download something 5, 6, 10 times sometimes because it was peer-to-peer. And the quality was not always great. Sometimes a song got cut off in the middle. Sometimes the sound quality was scratchy. Sometimes you had to download a song several times before you got a decent version. But if you're willing to pay 29 cents initially for a song, you got a very high definition version first time. And a lot of people were willing to do that. They still are. And so he had high quality, easy to use, put it together. And that's what made the iPod explode and all this. But he got a little bit of competitive turbulence here. But what did he do when sales started to go down? Well, he jumped the curve, what I call jump the curve to the next level. I'm going to draw another curve down here. He started off here, and then what did he do? Color, iPods, video, iPods. Okay, eventually he connected it to a phone with a radical innovation. So these are kind of incremental. Now he's got a radical innovation. Then he makes an iPad. Then he, all of a sudden he has, TVs and watches, even connected to cars now. And so that's why Apple is one of those highly capitalized companies in the world, because they were continually able to move forward and create this infrastructure for their iPods. And now, of course, they may have an ecosystem where, your watch and your Mac and your iPod and iPad, they all talk to each other now. So it's an ecosystem that really coherently holds everything together. So this is the product life cycle that we have to think about as we look at our products, in our product market matrix. At the same time, once you come up with the, in the startup side, manufacturing cost per unit initially is really high, but at some point you're going to have to freeze the design so that the guys in the process side who are actually manufacturing it are able to be somewhat efficient in the manufacturing floor, such that they're able to create these things in a cost-effective way. So at some point you freeze the design, and then you wait for the sales to change. So usually right in here, okay, right around in here, okay, you're going to stabilize and freeze the design. That way you can start selling these things, and the manufacturing guys can make them efficiently. And then once you get to this point, though, you've got a new design that you're going to bring to bear. And that means the guys on the manufacturing floor need to be ready for that next new design. Because down here, you can't be making a bunch of changes, because every time you start making changes, that means you're going to be hurting the efficiencies on the shop floor. You may be hurting your own productivity, which means you're going to be hurting your own profitability. Okay, so that's the interaction between the process and the product life cycle. And that works different for different people. Like in my case, with the making presses that made currency, we couldn't get out. We didn't make that many of them, so we're always in this kind of jumbled, job shop mode. If you get into more heavy equipment, the Caterpillar or somebody, now all of a sudden you can do multiple products but it's kind of more of a disconnected batch flow. At some point, you get into auto assembly, where you think Henry Ford and the lines going off. Then you've got a connected line flow. You're starting to get a lot of efficiencies here. And then, of course, high volume, high standard commodity products, sugar refineries, dynamic random access memory chips, whatever. So that's just continuous flow, and you're just, popping out a commodity product. So, but you have to figure out where you are on this line to be able to determine what's best in terms of your product process matrix balance. A lot of that has to do with manufacturing priorities. you can't be all five things to all people. Usually low cost is the one that gets you. For example, in BMW case study we're going to be going over, you're going to find that BMW, they were highly innovative and they were high quality, and they were trying to be as flexible as they could, but they couldn't make too many changes into each thing. But at the same time, BMW is not the lowest cost car. It's one of the high-end luxury vehicles. So they had to be highly innovative, you know, because that's kind of the reputation of BMW. They also had to be high quality. At the same time, they had to be flexible enough and dependable enough with what they were producing. So here, they're trying to, you know, excel in this and excel in high quality, and they had to remain what we call competitive parity in this area and competitive parity and dependability. In other words, they couldn't do worse than the other people. They had to do at least as good as their competitors. But then in low cost, they just said, okay, we're going to be just a high price automobile, and people are willing to pay for the innovation and high quality that we bring them. Okay. So this is how you balance your manufacturing priorities. And as you do this, you go through sometimes, you know, the identifying what's manufacturing's strategic role. You know, minimizing your manufacturing. Sometimes manufacturing things just aren't that great, but that you have such a strong marketing and sales campaign that it's okay. In the Hyundai, when they initially came in, the Hyundai automobile, when it first came to the United States, you know, John Krafcik, is the CEO, admits this. You know, it was, you know, Jay Leno and guys used to make fun of it, saying, "How do you double the value of a Hyundai?" Well, you put gas in it, right? And so they knew that it wasn't that hurt them a little bit. So, but you know, they brought it in, and as they started to achieve parity with their, you know, as they got their quality better and better and better, they had to do other things to be able to make sure that people understood that, okay, the Hyundai car is getting better and better and better, right? And so as they got better, Hyundai was able to leverage other parts of the company. In other words, they started to give like the highest warranty of any automobile in the industry. Why? Because the quality was so good. Manufacturing was now leading the part, and that gave the marketing people the ability to do something that was really outlandish, giving the highest, you know, warranty that was out there. Okay, so they actually provided credible support to an overall business strategy. So now, and that enabled, you know, the fact that manufacturing was getting so good, it allowed the marketing strategy to drive the business forward. It allowed some of the financial strategies to be able, because they could, you know, the automobile was so good that they didn't have a lot of people take advantage of the warranty. So that was, you know, the financial incentive was there too. So, you know, those are the things that you have to look at, and then eventually you get to pursue a manufacturing-based competitive advantage, so that now manufacturing is really leading the corporation forward, and everybody else is just there, you know, to support the excellence that the manufacturing operation has. So you can initially start out bad, but you can improve and improve and improve until that manufacturing really is the one driving things forward. But this is, you have to take a real strong look at what stage are you in, and what do you need to do to move to the next stage if you're not in stage 4 already. And how do you do that? Well, you've got, you know, we've always talked about leadership and leaders, you know, building the vision. We saw John Kennedy earlier. John Kennedy was, you know, a transformational leader. You know, he focused on the vision, obviously very charismatic, a lot of enthusiasm, very proactive, jumping out there. And NASA didn't come to him with this idea. He brought the idea to NASA because he felt it was something that the United States needed to do at the time. At the time, people were very concerned in the United States. The Russians, or the USSR, had put Sputnik out, which is a satellite that was basically, it was a communication satellite, but nobody knew that. But it was going around at night, beeping every night, and everybody was very afraid. And we were, you know, United States' pride was being hurt a little bit because we were losing the space race, and so President Kennedy became a transformational leader and really drove things forward in that way. But at some point, once the transformational leader sets the vision, the transactional leaders here, some people call these managers, some people call these transactional leaders, whatever. These are the people who get things done. They make sure the goals are done. Once they're done, they use rewards and punishment for motivation, and they're reactive. They're the ones down there on, in the project teams, on the shop floor. These are the ones getting things done. So these are two kinds of leaders that you need to pull together to make sure that you evolve your strategy forward. So that's all we have for this segment, and I'll talk to you on a different segment in the next one. In the meantime, stay safe.